I'm gonna try to keep this joint right here as quick and short as possible. Now, recently, Toyotaro has come forth saying that everything within Dragon Ball is considered canon. Now, since then, a lot of people have either... You bitch ass Anyway, since then, a lot of people have either been hyped, confused, or irritated by the news for a variety of different reasons. But what I can't seem to get is, one, why is there still confusion on what's canon and what's not canon? And number two, the fact that so many people hear one piece of information and then proceed to just blast everything out of proportion. Now, to jump into what all this noise is about, Toyotaro in a recent press conference has stated that as far as he's concerned, everything within Dragon Ball is canon. Now, a lot of people have taken this as an absolute definitive truth regarding the connectivity of the various offshoots within the Dragon Ball franchise. That's talking about stuff like Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Online, to Super Dragon Ball Heroes, to Dragon Ball Xenoverse, etc, etc. Now, some people are hyped to hear that, and others are upset about it because it only makes things seem even more confusing than they already are. Now, canon, right, is described as a collection of texts or rules that are regarded as authoritative, which means it's something that can be considered as true, accurate, or reliable. Basically, canon is the difference between what counts and what doesn't count. But ultimately, the fact of the matter is, a lot of people are looking at this the wrong way. And I think it's fair to say that they're either going off of what some other content creator said, or it's possible that they're one of those people who struggles with reading and comprehension and reading comprehension. Or they're the type of person who only hears whatever they want to hear and then they go on with the rest of their life denying objective reality. But I'm just making this point so that we can get this straight once and for all. Again, Toyotaro said that as far as he's concerned, everything within Dragon Ball is canon, meaning that it's his opinion that everything is canon. It's canon to him. That is not the same thing as if he were to say that everything in Dragon Ball is canon. You can easily interpret bro's statement as him saying that all of these different offshoots of Dragon Ball all matter in some way, shape, or form, simply because of the massive impact that all of them had both on the collective Dragon Ball franchise as well as the fan base. Alright, so boom. Here you have all these different Dragon Ball related titles, right? Right here you got the main timeline or the main universe, whichever you want to call it. Over here is what some refer to as the non-canon stuff, and that consists of stuff like the Dragon Ball Z movies, which is basically everything from Dead Zone up until Wrath of the Dragon. Now, Battle of Gods isn't counted because it's easily placed within the main universe without any contradictions within the narrative or point in which these events took place. And the same also goes for Revival of F, Broly, and Superhero. And I guess you could also say that one Dragon Ball movie that was, you know, the special with Vegeta's brother Turbo, if you want to count that. Then you got stuff like Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Online, Super Dragon Ball Heroes, Dragon Ball Xenoverse, and some other stuff that I can't think of right now. Now here is the very simple and short breakdown. All of this stuff is quote unquote canon in its own right. However, there is only one main timeline or one main universe, which is the Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Daima, and Dragon Ball Super timeline. Each of these installations are simply just sequels of the previous titles. All of these are canon because of the fact that Akira Toriyama was directly involved in all of these projects. Now, even though Daima has no manga, Toriyama's heavy involvement with the project does make it easy to regard it as official, because believe it or not, the direct input of the author does indeed count as source material. It's the same thing with Bleach. The 1,000-Year Blood War has a lot of information and a lot of fights and a lot of scenes that are strictly only in the anime. There's a bunch of stuff that never appeared in the manga. Now, of course, this was due to time constraints as well as Kubo's health condition at the time and all the other noise that goes on within the manga industry circle. But Kubo's heavy involvement with the 1,000-Year Blood War anime is his way of saying, see, this is what I wanted to put in the manga, but never got the chance to. So even though the extra dialogue and the fights and the backstories and the extra scenes and all that stuff are anime only, it still counts as canon because it comes directly from the creator of the IP. And of course, the creator of the IP is the only one that gets to decide what's canon and what's not. Now, as for the other stuff, the Dragon Ball Z movies are canon, but not to the main universe. They are canon to their own continuity. All of these events took place in an alternate universe. Now, yeah, Toriyama did have input in these movies, such as the character designs and things like that, but these are deviations from the original source material, and there are way too many timeline and plot contradictions to say that these movies took place in the main universe. Now, there are some exceptions though, such as the BoJack movie, which you can easily say that simply just took place within the 7-year time skip after the Cell Saga. one and done. Or Wrath of the Dragon, which you could say just took place after the Majin Buu saga. You know what I'm saying? These two movies actually have the most potential to fit into the main universe. But nonetheless, these movies are in a separate continuity. The same thing applies to Dragon Ball GT, Dragon Ball Online, which honestly, there are some people who do consider Dragon Ball Online as canon, but just in the distant future. And there's also people who say the same thing with GT. And honestly, it makes sense to say that, okay, this just happens in the distant future. That's why you don't see it in the manga. But it's just easier to say that these things take place within their own continuity. And then there's Xenoverse, which is it's kind of like a bit of a sandbox game in itself, where you pretty much get to choose your own adventures. In a way, if you think about it, it's kind of like, you know, back in the day in the early 2000s with that Matrix Online game, how they say it's kind of like a continuation of the Matrix movies, but at the same time, it kind of lies in this realm of it's kind of canon, but not really. Or they decide to say that it's not canon later down the line, because it's like, all right, we're just going to do away with all that shit. But anyway, and then you get the stuff like Super Dragon Ball Heroes, which if you've ever seen even a couple of episodes of that web series, it pretty much speaks for itself why this can't possibly take place in the main timeline. I mean, if we really keeping it a stack, that whole Super Dragon Ball Heroes joint is basically just a big ass commercial to sell Dragon Ball toys. But nonetheless, all of these are set within their own universe because of the various contradictions and inconsistencies regarding the main universe. So they can't possibly all fit in the same timeline. So the best way to go about this whole thing is just to say it's part of the overall Dragon Ball multiverse. And you can apply this same logic to other anime like Naruto, My Hero Academia, One Piece, Bleach, etc., that all have movies that are full of things that never happened in the source material. That's in a separate universe too. So Memories of Nobody and Diamond Dust Rebellion and the Hellverse and all that stuff, separate universe. Now, aside from all that, there's other stuff like Dragon Ball Multiverse, Dragon Ball AF, Dragon Ball Z Abridged, Dragon Ball New Hope, Dragon Ball Kakume, SSJ 9000, Dragon Ball Deliverance, Dragon Ball Absalon, etc. All of that stuff falls under the umbrella of fanfiction. It has absolutely no connection to anything regarding the official IP, since it wasn't created, co-signed, or officialized by the original creators or the studios that work on materials such as the anime, the games, and other merch. Therefore, nothing that happens within these fanfictions and parodies actually matter. I mean, as much as I like Dragon Ball Kakume, it has no significance to anything regarding the IP. Now, going back to an earlier point, there are some exceptions to this rule. For example, in the past, there are people who have created doujins, which is basically a self-published manga of popular manga that the original creators of the manga dug so much to the point that they decided to consider that piece of fan fiction as canon. And of course, as the creator of the work, they have the authority to say what's canon and what's not. So if the creator of an IP sees a piece of fan fiction of their work and they decide to say, you know what, I'm going to regard this piece of work as canon, so it officially counts as part of the verse. Now, some might argue that Toyotaro is a successor to Toriyama in regards to Dragon Ball, which is true. But at the end of the day, Toyotaro is not the originator of Dragon Ball. Now, he can decide to add his own ideas into the mix of the IP for things going forward. But what he can't do is retroactively change the IP and fundamentally alter what makes Dragon Ball what it is. This whole matter of canon and non-canon, it isn't to say that you can't enjoy these different offshoots of the IP if you actually like those things. It just means that you can't consider everything as part of the same universe because it's too messy to do so. To give them their own continuity grants an easier perspective on the series without having to contemplate how all of these different events can possibly fit together into the same narrative, when obviously they can't narratively fit together. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Let me know what y'all think and we can chop it up in the comment section. Peace.